let's take a look at the second most important model for communication, the so-called Osgood and Schramm model of interpersonal communication. Remember, in the very first model, in Laswell's model, we talked about its weaknesses. We talked about what lacks in the model Laswell proposed. One important aspect is that it lacks the description or the accounting for the interaction part between agents in the process of communication. And a lot of times processes of communication are between human beings. In Osgood and Schramm's model of communication, such shortcoming is overcome by giving an interpersonal aspect to communication. Take a look at the main features of Osgood and Schramm's model. First of all, this model is not a one-way or linear model as Laswell proposed his model of 5W. In the Osgood and Schramm's model, the process of communication is described as a circular one, not a one-way or linear one, but as a circular one, two-way. Cyclical, what does cyclical mean? Simply, it means relating to circles. And this model emphasizes feedback and interaction between the agents, between the communicators, the receivers, and the senders. Okay? Take a look. These are the three key features of Osgood-Schramm's model. First of all, communication is a continuous process. Remember, take a look again at Laswell's model, linear one, from one end to another. Schramm and Osgood, they say no, communication is more complicated than this simple, structured, one-direction model. Rather, take a look at this model, a circular or cyclical model proposed by Osgood and Schramm. Okay? In this process, one party or one communicator sends out message to another. The other party in the communication processes this message and then gives some feedback message to the sender. And this process can go on and on with multiple rounds. This looks more like the real-life communication in comparison with the model proposed by Laswell. Okay, first of all, communication is a continuous process with message being sent and received and interpreted and responded to at regular interval. Next, the second feature, no fixed sender or receiver is defined in the process in the model created by Osgood and Schramm. Interpersonal communication model does not care very much about who was the sender of message originally and who is the receiver of the message in the end. It does not matter that much. Whereas in the model proposed by Laswell, it's apparent. The sender is the sender and the receiver is the receiver in a linear model, because a linear model, it has to have a starting point and it needs an ending point. Whereas in a cyclical, interpersonal model, communication, sender or receiver does not matter. They can be both when the role changes. Both parties can act as encoders and decoders and interpreters. Both parties can be senders. Both parties can be originators. Both parties can be audience. Both parties can be receivers. Okay? And this, as long as this whole process, this cyclical process goes on. The last feature, feedback is especially essential, is especially important in this second model, this so-called interpersonal communication model, making communication dynamic and interactive, and more importantly, more real-life-like. I'll take a look at the circle, the picture again. Party A, Party B, sender, receiver, okay, originator, audience. But their roles can change as message moves forward, being received, being interpreted, digested, processed, and then a feedback is produced and sent to the originator. So this process involves three main components. Take a look. Three main components during the whole process. The so-called decoder, interpreter, and encoder. Take a look at what they mean. Encoder is the person or the party sending the message. Okay, you have something in mind, then you put the content of your thought, of your feeling into a physical message. The message may be by the means of telephone, in the form of an email or a video. You basically encode your message encode the content of your thought into the message. Decoder, what does decoder mean? Decode, look it up, look the word up, decode in your dictionary. Decode, what does decode mean? The receiving, the unpacking of message. The interpreter also refers to the process of making sense. The interpreting involved in the decoder phase juxtaposed with the interpreter part during the process. Let's say the decoder part of this whole process involves some shallow, some superficial interpreting, let's say. Receiving the message. You're sending me a message through speech. You're saying hello, for example, and I'm receiving it. As I receive it, we might as well call it I'm decoding it. Perhaps it involves a shallow bit of interpreting or getting the meaning of what you just sent to me in your speech. We need to make some distinction between the interpreting part of the real sense-making process, the real sense-making part of the model. Take a look at the green, orange, and the red part. The interpreter part is indispensable. It always indicates deeper and the thorougher and the more general phase of understanding, getting the meaning of what the message contains. Right, three components, and moreover, in a verbal circle, the sender encodes a message, the receiver decodes and interprets it, and then responds, becoming a new sender. That's why this model is called a circular or cyclical model. Examples can be many. For example, this example in conversation, person A says blah blah, person B said blah blah. This process of conversation can be carried on incessantly without end, as long as these two parties are capable. Okay, take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of this second interpersonal model of communication. First of all, the strength, the advantages of such a model. It's interactive and two-way. It amends the shortcomings of Laswell's model of a linear and too idealistic, too simplistic model of communication. That is the 5W model. Here, with Osgood and Schramm's model, we are having an interactive and two-way and more complicated and messy, a model for delineating, describing a messy and more real-life communication. Secondly, this interpersonal model can apply to all forms of communication. Let's call nearly all forms of communication, whether it's face-to-face, speech communication, whether it's mass communication, whether it's newer forms of communication through much more recent and modern technology, such as through the means of digital media. And then thirdly, such a model of interpersonal communication accounts for miscommunication. More importantly, keep in mind, a theory, a model, not only successfully explains the smooth flow of events, but also can explain odd phenomena, may include explanation for odd phenomena, even failures. Such a model as the interpersonal communication model accounts for miscommunication. Ever played the game, so-called game Telephone? 玩过这个游戏吗 ？Telephone 游戏，打电话这个游戏玩过吗？怎么没玩过？小的时候，幼儿园 in your kindergarten, you play the game all the time. I whisper a message in your ears. Okay, secretly, first of all, I write this message down on a piece of paper, and then put that paper away, and I whisper that message in your ears without letting other people hear it. And then you whisper that message into the ears of your next person without letting others to hear it. And then on and on, you pass the message around in the room. Perhaps it's a line of people, a line of little friends, a line of classmates. And in the very end, let the very last person say it loud, what he or she hears. That message he announces or she announces can be rather very different than the message I just put down on that piece of paper. Sometimes it can be ridiculous, right? That game in English is called Telephone. 这个叫以讹传讹的游戏，对吧？小时候都玩过，对吧？非常的夸张，非常的搞笑啊。那么好了，这个 Schramm 和这个 Osgood 他们的这个 model 的话，可以解释为什么出现这种 miscommunication。在这个过程当中有 feedback， 这个过程当中有对信息的there are encoders, interpreters, and decoders in the process. Feedback are generated. Understanding, interpretation may not be as perfect, as exact, as precise as we wish. Human mind can make mistakes during this cyclical course of events. Okay, so that can account for miscommunication, can explain the failure of communication between human individuals. These are the strengths and advantages of their model. What about the limitations? What about disadvantages of such a model? The first problem is that such a model as Osgood's and Schramm's, it ignores external noise. Again, take a look at the cyclical model. There is no outside influence that can happen within such a cyclical closed model. Take a look why it's called closed. There is no point where outside factors can interfere with such a closed circular movement of events. Nothing from outside is seen in such a model. So it's incapable to explain external factors, including external noises, which may happen more often than not. For example, during the game of Telephone, there could be outside factors. A loud music was played around you. Distraction, technical issues, cultural differences, these can all amount to barriers, amount to factors that contribute to the failure of communication, miscommunication. Secondly, the second disadvantage, the second limitation is that this model assumes equal roles between the sender and the receiver. In real life, senders and the receivers, one party and the other party, most often than not, are not equal in their social status. For example, in a classroom, I'm a sender of message. I am a teacher. I'm talking to you, sending you message. This higher status in the social context may give the message I put across some extra credit, some extra point, even to the extent of coercion. For example, if I say, please, with all due respect, everybody, with all due respect, do your homework. Yes, I'm being polite. I'm being very equal. on equal terms with you? Not exactly. I'm in fact expressing very politely my command to you, my order to you. The vital part in the message is do your homework. This is an instruction. You are not, as students, in a position to bargain with me, to talk back to me. No, you're not in that position. So in real life communication, we have to take that factor into account. The social relation, the power dynamics between agents. For example, another example, if we are dealing with the government, are we as an individual powerless and weak in the same position as institutions such as jurisdiction or administration branches of the government? Definitely not. They are very powerful state machines, political machines, underpinned by violent means of violence. Take a look again. Such a model as interpersonal model assumes equal roles, which is not the true case, not the real case in a lot of circumstances. The third weakness is the model is limited for mass communication. Of course, mass communication, in terms of mass communication, well, the feedback may not be as smooth and direct and instantaneous as the circular model suggests. When we are watching TV, for example, we are receivers of message, right? But in this interpersonal model of communication, are we able to send feedbacks to the sender? Eventually we can, but not instantaneously. The sender of message being the TV station. This interpersonal model can be widely and appropriately applied to the realm of mass communication without much difficulty, without much resistance. For example, the social media and digital media is a fitful venue for such a media to be applied. The field of news and journalism is another field, and education and learning, of course, is yet another most appropriate field.